The first time I heard about the tunnels, I was 6 years old. My older brother James whispered it to me the night before my own offering, the night I would be sent down. Every child in our town went through it. A tradition, they called it. James had gone 2 years before me. He never spoke about it after. They live under us, he had whispered that night, his voice barely audible over the rustling wind outside our window. You won't see them at first, but you'll hear them. The clicking, the breathing. He had gripped my wrist, his fingers ice cold. And whatever you do, Alice, don't. A knock at the door had cut him off. Our parents stood in the hallway, their faces pale, drawn. My mother had smiled, but it was wrong. Forced. Time for bed, sweetheart. Big day tomorrow. That night I didn't sleep. The entrance to the tunnels was beneath the old church. The whole town gathered, their faces blank as the priest led me forward, his hands heavy on my shoulders. No one cried. No one tried to stop it. Even my parents just stood there, silent, their hands clasped together so tightly their knuckles went white. I remember looking back at James one last time. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The priest unlatched the iron door, and a wave of damp, rotting air rolled up from the darkness below. The tunnel yawned open, black as ink, the stone steps vanishing into the abyss. They gave me nothing, no flashlight, no matches, only the clothes on my back. Then they shut the door behind me. The dark swallowed everything. At first I just stood there, my breath too loud in the suffocating silence. Then I reached out, fingers brushing along the stone walls, slick with something wet, and forced myself to move forward. The air was thick, cloying, full of an earthy, sweet stench that clung to my tongue. The deeper I went, the stronger it got. The scent of decay, of meat that had sat too long in the sun. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic clicking. It echoed from somewhere ahead, bouncing off the stone walls. Sharp, deliberate, like the tapping of nails against glass. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed myself against the wall, swallowing a whimper. It was coming closer. A wet inhale, a slow, labored breath. Then from the blackness ahead, a second breath. I wasn't alone. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting my lips so hard I tasted blood. James had tried to warn me, don't move, don't breathe, don't let them know you're here. Something shifted in the darkness ahead, a scrape, like flesh dragging against stone. Then a whisper, dry and brittle, like dead leaves rustling in the wind. Alice. It knew my name. They always knew your name. I don't know how long I stood there. Time didn't feel real in the tunnels. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and hungry, swallowing everything. Then I felt it. Something soft, wet, probing brushed against my cheek. I choked on a gasp and bolted, stumbling blindly through the tunnel. My hands hit something sticky, webbed as I ran, pulling away. The tunnels twisted, endless, the air vibrating with inhuman whispers. They were close now. I could hear the scuttling of limbs, the scraping of fingers against the walls. Then the ground vanished beneath me. I tumbled down a slope of damp earth, rolling to a stop in something soft and warm. I reached out, fingers sinking into spongy, pulsing flesh. I wasn't on the ground anymore. I was lying on them. The walls pulsed like lungs, ribbed, veined, slick with something that oozed. A cavern stretched before me, illuminated by a sickly, bioluminescent glow that pulsed from the walls like a heartbeat. And they were everywhere. I saw one clearly for the first time. It stood on 6 thin limbs, its body a twisting mass of pale flesh that rippled and pulsed as it moved. Its head was featureless, smooth, except for a vertical slit of jagged teeth that twitched and gnashed as it breathed. It had a pair of appendages on its back that looked like they once were wings, now torn probes. Another unfolded itself from the wall, its limbs detaching like a spider uncurling from a web. The clicking started again, but now I understood. It wasn't random. It was speech. In the center of the cavern, something stirred, a mass of writhing flesh, shifting, reshaping itself as dozens of faces surfaced and sank back into its glistening bulk. Some were infant-like, their features barely formed, eyes fused shut. Others were too familiar. James. His face surfaced for only a moment, mouth open in a silent scream before the mass swallowed him back into itself. His eyes met mine. He was still alive. I choked on a sob. The children. This was what became of them. And I was next. A limb reached for me. I ran, crashing through flesh-webbed tunnels, my own heartbeat drowning out the whispers behind me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The iron door was ahead, cracked open just an inch. A mistake. Someone had left it unlocked. I threw myself against it, clawing at the edges. My fingers met cold air. Hands grabbed my ankles. I screamed, kicking wildly, the grip tightening, nails slicing into my skin. But then, light. Blinding. Searing. Hands pulled me up, yanking me out of the blackness. I hit the ground, gasping, my hands gripping dirt and grass and real air. The priest slammed the door shut behind me, his face expressionless as he slid the bolts into place. I looked around. The town stood in silence. My parents, my neighbors, James, they were all staring. But something was wrong. James was still standing at the back of the crowd. His face was still. His arms hung flat against his body. I turned slowly. The priest was watching me, his lips curling into a disgusted smirk. "Welcome back, Alice," he murmured. I turned to my parents. My mother's hands were still clasped together. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might crack. But neither of them moved to embrace me. Neither of them showed relief that I had returned. I had survived. Why did it feel like I wasn't supposed to?